Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I want to welcome our viewers from all over the world, including those of you who are watching us right now on portable TV using the app, which means you can watch this newscast using your mobile device. So there is a blockbuster story to tell you about today, which is nothing short of chilling, especially in lieu of the heated and dangerous back and forth that's going on right now between the United States and China. Now, this is a classified document that we want to tell you about, which has been leaked by none other than that dude you see right there. That's a young Daniel Ellsberg. Anybody who knows anything about U.S. history knows that he's famed for the Pentagon Papers, right? And this document reveals just how close we once came to an all-out nuclear war without even knowing it. You know, we always hear about the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, right? Missiles of October. But did you know that we likely came even closer to nuclear war 4 years earlier? We're going to detail for you how, in 1958, American military leaders pushed for a first-use nuclear strike on China, expecting and accepting the risk that the Soviet Union at the time would retaliate in kind, setting off a nuclear war. Now, what was the trigger for U.S. officials wanting to nuke China? Taiwan. And the fact that at the time, the communist Chinese military was engaging with its own military in the island surrounding the area of Taiwan, just as you see it today. So now ask yourself the following question. What is going on right now that makes this information that I shared with you, that, by the way, is still classified? This information that I am sharing with you is officially classified. What makes it so important, so relevant on this day? It is this: the fact that tensions right now between the United States and China over Taiwan are as hot as they've been since the Cold War, since that era that we were just talking about. And then there's this. China, did you know, has just announced that it's now ready to roll out a brand new weapon. There it is, a supersonic stealth bomber that could be a game changer when it comes to their own military preparedness. These two things happening at once. You think that's not important? We're drilling down on both of these remarkable developments here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we believe, as we say, it's time to do news again. Here's what we think is going to come to mind as you watch this newscast and these developments. Just how close did we actually come to an all-out nuclear war? We're going to tell you. Also, they have it, but will China now unveil its new stealth bomber publicly? And Jeffrey Epstein's helpers and recruiters are coming forward and will now testify against Ghislaine Maxwell. How big is that? All right. There's no more important story that we can bring you than one that gives us a better understanding of the possibility and the perils of nuclear war, right? There was a time when media types and politicians were constantly cognizant of this. But these days, it seems to not only be taken for granted, but actually bragged about. How many times, ask yourself, how many times don't you hear some irresponsible pundit, some politician, or some so-called journalist from one country or another, or some party or another, rail about how their enemy should be, quote, nuked, as if it's just a word, without understanding that it would lead to the end of the world as we know it. This is a sobering topic. And here to share what she knows with us is NRS correspondent Farron Franzek, here to tell us about this leak from, of all people, Daniel Ellsberg. What is he actually leaking? What are we learning?
This is what he is leaking.
Wow.
All of this, okay? This is one of these things where we know him again from the Pentagon Papers, where he told the world, mostly Americans, though, who it really mattered to, about how the U.S. government was lying to the American people about pulling out of Vietnam and about how they wanted to stay there much longer.
All true, by the way.
All true, yes. Now, in these documents, I'm going to pull up a map here for you so you can kind of see what we're looking at. The document notes, during the second Taiwan Straits crisis of 1958, Pentagon war planners believed that the islets of Quemoy and Matsu you see there, just a few miles from China's coast, were indefensible with conventional weapons. The entire military establishment assumed more and more that the nuclear weapons would be used in the event of hostilities. Now, the reason why Daniel Ellsberg is coming out with this, he says, as the United States moves to strengthen ties with Taiwan and de facto recognize Taiwanese independence, the geopolitical setup that created the second Taiwan Straits crisis, it must inevitably follow that the United States is once again preparing to fight a nuclear war with China. Now, he talks about Biden, not in these documents, obviously. This was back in the 1970s,
right,
but in the months since the inauguration, you have Joe Biden. He carried out kind of one of the most sweeping changes as far as the relationship with Taiwan since the adoption of the One China policy in 1978. Biden, he was the first American president to host Taiwan's ambassador at his inauguration. It's one of these things where he's starting to be a little bit more ambiguous with it. And what Ellsberg is saying is it's this kind of attitude is what's going to bring about more and more tensions with this. And again, like they said, had the conventional weapons not worked, they said we're going to have to do a nuclear drop, and going as far north as Shanghai.
One final punctuation on this from you. The United States has military plans to probably attack every country on Earth,
right,
because they're just provisional plans. That's not what we're talking about here. There were actual military leaders in the U.S. military trying to make this happen at the time and pushing it to the brink of happening.
Right, and a great quote from the former Secretary of State. You have it where he said the Cuban Missile Crisis is often described as the first nuclear crisis. Those of us who lived through the Quemoy crisis definitely regarded that as the first serious nuclear crisis.
So that's when it really happened,
right,
and we never knew. And this document is classified to this day.
And there's also talks about how it might have happened in 1985 as well. So when you were born and when I was born, there could have been bombs dropped.
Yeah, thank you for reminding everybody I was born in 1985.
No, I was going to say.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Farron Franzek, as usual. George Galloway, because, of any guest that we could possibly talk to on this day, George has actually put his neck on the line. He's actually stuck his chin out, as some would say, when it comes to standing up to people who don't take or consider the implications of war as maybe they should. So as we're looking at this scenario now, George, and learning that there may have been a nuclear war that we were this close to getting into in 1958, and seeing the same language being used today in this exchange between China and the United States over Taiwan, what thinketh you?
Well, I'm almost speechless. I have lived my whole life literally, because I was 8 years old when the Cuban Missile Crisis hit us, and when I went to bed thinking that the world might actually end tonight, because I had heard my parents talking about it. And now I learn that when I was 4 years old, we came much closer than we did in the Cuban Missile Crisis to the end of the world. For you're the only one who's put it bluntly. None of the other coverage of this will do so. A nuclear war means the end of the world. It means the end of all of us. And military leaders in the United States, this document reveals, were literally itching to get their finger on the trigger to set off a nuclear conflagration. First with China and then with the then Soviet Union, which would undoubtedly, indeed, was treaty bound to come to the defense of China. And that would have led to the end of the world. And yet we are discussing it here as if it were a piece of history. But there would have been no history if this cataclysmic event had happened. Now, you're also right to say it's important not just for its historical value, and God bless Daniel Ellsberg for giving it to us, but it's important because it might happen now in 2021. Anything can happen when you've got warships clogging up the Taiwan Straits and the South China Sea, when you've got alliances being formed that are quite explicitly alliances that are hostile to China. The only difference, Rick, is China's a lot more powerful in 2021 than it was in 1958.
Do you think that the people in power, in this case the Biden administration and others, understand the implications of this terse language going back and forth right now in consideration of the types of things that have happened historically?
Well, he ought to. First of all, he doesn't have the alibi of being Donald Trump. And secondly, he's old enough to know what war means. And that's conventional war, never mind nuclear war. So one assumes that wise counsels at the end of the day will still the hand of those that wish to provoke nuclear confrontation in the world. I like to think that Joe Biden is so wise, too wise, to be led down that road. I wasn't so confident about his predecessor, I've got to be perfectly honest with you. I thought that the impetuous nature of President Trump, the petulance, I often used to think, what if he gets into a temper or a rage some night? Then the world could end. Imagine that. I like to think that Biden is more sensible. But, Rick, accidents happen.
Yeah.
The pieces are all in place, and all it needs is an unruly or insubordinate military officer somewhere, or someone falling on the switch. And then you've got an exchange of weapons, and then you don't know where that's going to end.
Yeah, that's so important. Important words. Thanks so much, George. I appreciate the conversation and the sobering conversation.